Welcome to our commercial real estate series, Behind the Building, giving the audience behind the scenes look at different aspects of commercial real estate, featuring industry professionals and leaders who we work with every day to make it all happen. With me today is Jeff Vaughn, President and Senior Soil Scientist from Agri Waste Technology, which is one of the leading professional engineering and consulting firms in North Carolina. They specialize in site development and wastewater system design and maintenance. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, wastewater is a really important topic that people don't talk about that much unless there's a problem. But the fact of the matter is, everybody goes, and we've got to be able to responsibly treat and process that waste. So, we just can't contaminate nearby areas and, have people get sick. So, I'll start the line of questions by asking for people who don't live in soils and wastewater world every day, that they have public utilities that serve water and sewer to them. Can you explain why soil testing is often one of the very first and most critical steps in a development or land purchase?
Sure. So the soil type or the soil conditions is going to dictate what type or types of septic systems can be used on a piece of property. And it will in turn impact the cost of the septic system. The better the soils, let's just say better the soils, the more conventional a septic system can be. And so that's less sophisticated, less expensive than if the soils are poor for septic systems. Then the septic system choices become much more sophisticated and much more costly, not only to design, permit, and install, but also operate after they're in the ground. Another important factor with evaluating a piece of soil and understanding what the site could support is the amount of space available for a septic system, and how much space is available for different types of septic systems. And so those are the two main things that we consider at sort of a high level, is what type or types of septic systems can be supported by a piece of property and how much available space for septic systems is on the property.
Mm-hmm. And when you are actually on site and you're looking at the soils, I've seen it done before, are you referring to is it the Munsell soil, chart of soils or whatever? Are you looking at the different colors and all of that whenever you're evaluating?
That is one of the things that we are looking at, that we look at about 8 or 10 different soil characteristics. The first thing that we look at is just the surface conditions, the topography, the landscape position of the property, the proximity to any property features like creeks or streams or ponds or wells or other structures, that kind of thing. And then we start looking at the soils, and there's about, like I said, 8 or 10 different soil characteristics that we evaluate. You mentioned one, color, and we do use the Munsell soil color charts to color out the soils because they can give us some indication of the conditions in the soil, and more often than not in our area, it would be related to water saturation or lack of water saturation. Obviously, if the soils are a certain color, they're going to show that there's water in that soil. If there's water in that soil or that layer of soil, it would not be suitable for septic. But we also look at other soil characteristics. We look at soil texture. You may have heard the terms, I'm sure most people have, of sand, silt, clay. A loam is another one. And so we look at that. We also look at soil structure, and that is the way that the soil particles are arranged in the soil. And depending on how they're arranged or they adhere to one another, impacts the water flow patterns. And if it impacts the water flow patterns, then it impacts the design of the septic system. We look at soil consistence, which is simply said how sticky and how hard is the soil. And the stickier it is, the harder it is, the slower it passes water, and you have to design the system accordingly. We look at other features like depth to water or indications of water or indications of rock or saprolite. And saprolite is basically a transition material between rock and soil. It's basically rock weathering into soil and becoming soil, and it happens over a very long period of time. And so those are some of the characteristics that we're looking at. It's different. What we do now and have for the past 30 or so years is different from the old fashioned perk test. We don't really do perk tests anymore. I know that that's the way it's listed in the MLS and so forth, but we don't really do perk tests where they used to go out, dig a hole in the ground, pour water in the hole, measure the depth of water in the hole, come back after a period of time and see how deep the water was in the hole and or how far it had moved down in the hole or perked into the soil. We don't do that anymore. We basically look at a number of different soil characteristics to determine what type or types of systems that the soil is suitable for.
Yeah, that's also interesting, and all the layers that you're looking at literally in the soil to help determine the appropriateness of whatever system or how it's used. So you evaluate sites' agricultural uses, residential, commercial, industrial, even municipal wastewater systems. When you go on site to those, how are you evaluating differently for those? Do you take different equipment? Are you measuring differently? How are they different there?
Um, at a high level, they're different because they're regulated differently. And so we do evaluate it differently. We do use different equipment sometimes. Um, and the reason they're regulated differently is because the wastewater constituents are different across agricultural, residential, commercial, industrial, municipal, and also the volumes of wastewater or the size of the wastewater systems are um, much different between, like, you have a single family residence, that wastewater flow is very small compared to a 100,000 population town or city, or a uh, you know livestock operation that has 2,500 livestock head, or an industrial system where there's some sort of industrial process wastewater that includes constituents that are not just your typical domestic type wastewater that would come from sinks, toilets, showers, and washing machines and dishwashers and things like that.
When you say the word constituents, we're not talking about voters here. what, what does that mean in your world?
So it basically has to do with what is in the wastewater in terms of nutrients, solid material, in some cases heavy metals, in some cases other chemicals that may be a part of some industrial process. So that's what I mean when I say constituents.
So, from a commercial real estate perspective, how can the soil evaluation impact a project's feasibility, cost, or even a timeline?
Sure. So two ways, the two big ways I would say is the type of system that the soils would support on a piece of commercial property. That's going to impact cost and timeline, similar to what I described in a way that I described earlier. And then also the type of wastewater that's being generated. If the commercial property is for a residential subdivision or some other commercial use that's only going to generate domestic strength type wastewater, it's going to be different than a commercial use that generates some other type of wastewater based on whatever the facility is being used for.
And not just designing and evaluating the feasibility, you're also involved in wastewater system inspections and ongoing system operations that are required by the different governing bodies. What are some of the most common issues you see with existing systems that property owners, commercial and even residential, overlook until there's actually a problem, or maybe when the property is being sold and it's uncovered?
Yeah. I would say there's probably two major ones. The first one would be that the permit that was issued originally for the septic system no longer matches what's there, and maybe it never did. An example would be that it's a 4-bedroom house, but the septic system permit is for a 3-bedroom house, and that would be uncovered during the real estate transaction. If it was something commercial, it might have been originally permitted. The system might have been originally permitted for some type of use. Maybe it was just office space for some type of business, and the only wastewater that they were generating was just from the bathrooms that are in the facility. But at some point, that got sold, and the new owner used it for some other purpose, and a different type of wastewater was generated. And then they go to sell it, and you find out that, hey, there's a problem because the system is only permitted for this type of wastewater, but there's another type of wastewater actually coming into it. So that's one thing that we typically see. Another one would be that uh, something is built on top of the septic system. It could be a structure like a house or a deck or a shed, or a building, but it also could be a driveway, a parking area, even including pavement. It could be a swimming pool, lots of different things. So we find that something is built on top of the system, and so all of a sudden we have a regulatory and many times an operational problem arise during a real estate transaction.
And that can be so costly and even kill the deals. And yeah, it's tough to probably to deliver that news that
Yeah.
of the scope of what you have to do in order to fix it, I'm sure.
Yeah, and those problems are the ones that are difficult to overcome. If you do an inspection for a real estate transaction, let's just say there's a broken pipe or a bad pump or some electrical issue, that's easy to fix. You just fix it, and then you move on in the situation. But when you've got a regulatory issue or you've got something built on top of your septic system, that is a hard thing to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, you recently earned the North Carolina Authorized On-Site Wastewater Evaluation Certification. Say that 15 times. And you were part of the inaugural class, even. So, explain, Jeff, what that certification is and why it's a significant change in how septic systems can be permitted in North Carolina.
Sure. So the holder of that certification, first of all, they must be a licensed soil scientist before they can, North Carolina licensed soil scientist before they can ever set for that class and that exam. Um, what it allows is for the holder of that certification to write the septic system permit in lieu of the local county health department. So for the first 25 years of my career, the only entity that could grant a septic system permit for like generally single family residences was the local county health department. Well, now that allows other credentialed individuals to grant permits in lieu of the county, and the county just collects the information. It's revolutionized a lot of the building. Most of our builder and developer clients have gone 100% to that because it does cost more because we're not taxpayer subsidized, but it provides more certainty and clarity on the timeline for having a permit, and it also provides more flexibility that during the building process, if something slightly changes with the building, those issues can typically be dealt with on the fly, and it doesn't necessarily shut down the whole process and we start over. And so those are the two big things that have really revolutionized the permitting industry is the timeline and the flexibility.
Hmm. Yeah, time is money. You've got to be
Yes,
able to adapt and adjust with your plans and be able to work collaboratively with your
right,
group in order to make these projects happen. There's a lot of money on the line, and people want to, the developers, they want to get the projects done and complete.
right.
So, for landowners considering selling or developing property, what proactive steps can you advise so that the soils and wastewater systems that they may be thinking about may increase the value and marketability of their land?
Sure. So many people, that's a really good question because many folks just let prospective buyers do all of that due diligence. But if you are a seller of the property, yeah, you may have to cough up a little bit of money to begin with. But if you can come to the selling table with a soils report that tells you what you can and what you cannot do with a particular piece of property, that puts you in a real position of strength for understanding the value of that property and commanding a price that more closely indicates the value of that property. Just an example, if you have a soils report that says 80% of your property and it's 50 acres, and 80% of your property has suitable soils for conventional type septic systems, that puts you in a real position of strength. And that makes that property much more valuable than if you come to the table with that same 50-acre tract and you don't have any information about the soils and you allow the buyer to find out all that information on their own. Yeah, they have to incur some costs, but they may be able to get it at a cheaper price because you don't know what you have. It
Exactly.
can work against you as well if you find out that you have pretty poor soils. Um, that can make the property less valuable as well.
Hmm. But at least you're knowing it up front. And I love being in that position and being proactive about knowing what you have and being able to properly value it ahead of time so that
Right.
there are no surprises. And I actually think about the time that I had your group come out to one of our land sites to evaluate the soil, and they were met one early morning by a fella with a shotgun, and that was not so nice. But
Yeah,
your team handled it really well.
it
But
does.
in the
Some,
end, we got the information on that site and got that sold. So
I
appreciate
think
your help on that.
finish that up if I remember. I remember that right. But yeah, it does happen. Nosy neighbors, can't on the best case scenario, they just waste some of your time, and on the worst case scenario, they point a gun at you.
That's right. That's right. Hopefully not too often. So looking ahead, how do you see wastewater system design regulation and the oversight evolving in North Carolina? And what should property owners, brokers like me, and developers be paying attention to now?
Well, regulations never get more lenient; they only get more strict. And the oversight part of it is a regulation. And so things are probably only going to get more and more strict. But on the upside, the privatization of some of the permitting has really made some of that strict part of the rules more manageable. And so I would say that as time goes by, we're probably going to see more and more of the privatization of the whole permitting process. In fact, some of our neighboring states have pretty much 100% gone to the privatization of septic system permitting. My thought is that we are also headed that direction, just because of the reasons I mentioned earlier with the timeline and flexibility when you're dealing with somebody who is in the private industry. So that's what I would keep my eye on, is the privatization, because that's probably where it's going to go for good. I mean, it's going to cost more, and it does cost more from just the upfront money. But in terms of like what you said, time is money. And so if you can tell a builder, I can get you a permit in 4 weeks versus the regulatory community or the county health department saying it's going to be 16 plus weeks, that's a big difference and can make all the difference in the world in terms of income stream and total income and so forth.
Right, right. It makes a big difference to the projects. So, as we round out this interview, Jeff, what is your advice on working collaboratively with all the parties, from the broker, the owner, developer, all the individuals, to start to work through these development projects that are coming online?
Sure. I guess my biggest recommendation would be start working together early in the process so that there's no surprises. So often we get involved in projects where, um, they're already a year or so into the project, have done a lot of work, but they don't know anything about the soils, and it just totally changes their whole plan. And so I would say get involved with a soil scientist very early so that you know what you're dealing with in terms of system type, what type of wastewater flow a site can handle, whether it's, you're building a big commercial facility that's going to need a big system, or you're trying to do a subdivision with, 20, 40, 100 lots, that you know what you can get out of that property.
Yeah, the wastewater system is the foundation of what you're going to build, in essence. So you've got
Sure.
to make sure that you are planning that well in advance and know what your budget is for that
Right.
as well.
And you have to have a septic system permit before you can ever get your building permit. So start with your septic system.
That's right. That's right. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being a part of this Behind the Building series. It's been enjoyable to hear all about waste and the systems and everything that you do to make it all happen for our industry. I encourage the viewers to reach out to me, as I want to be your resource for all things commercial real estate. I can help connect you with Jeff from Agri Waste Technology if you have any questions about their services for your needs, and any other professionals that are critical for maximizing the value and function of your property. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to keep an eye out for future Behind the Building interviews with other awesome industry professionals just like Jeff.